Here is a prototype of the new version of the voice display, which we also call dash module number 3, or DM3 for short. Actually, I have here a prototype of the new version of the control unit, which is going to be used in all of the new modules, and prototype inputs, prototype display drivers. And here we have a prototype of the dash top indicators, which enable us to drive high switched dash top indicators, which have a common low connection, or low switched dash top indicators, which have a common high connection. The indicators now on the new version can all be fully functional if you want them to be. We can use what we call user options in the software to determine whether the indicators are functional or not. You might not want all of the indicators to be functional if you don't connect sufficient real inputs to drive all of the indicators. So we do still have the option of having just the normal auto and pursuit indicators active, which will be more reminiscent of the TV car, or even just having these all in display in a show mode. Now, all of the dash modules that we use support some switches which allow us to switch between the various operating modes and perform a number of functions within the software. We'll go through the function of those switches in the various modes in the rest of this video. Let's look first of all at the normal running mode of the unit, which is the most frequently used mode, as that is the functional mode. And when we first power up, we display the software version number on the voice display in the format of the first digit. So for example, the current version is 23.5, that is built in 2023, month 5. So we'll see the first 2 LEDs illuminate here, the first 3 LEDs illuminate here, and then 5 LEDs indicate on this bar gauge, indicating version 23.5. Let's just do that. You can see 23.5. It then goes into the normal running mode after an optional countdown sequence. There is a user option which allows you to include a delay before anything happens, and another user option allows you to decide whether or not you want the countdown sequence to be performed. Now let's talk about the function of the indicators. Right now we have the functional operation of the indicator selected, and it's fully functional. That is to say that all of the indicators are functional: the dash top indicators, the side indicators, and these lower 3 indicators. So let's talk about the function of these indicators in this mode. Regarding the dash top indicators, the first one, which is labelled as power on the TV car, just indicates that power is applied to the unit. The second of the dash top indicators, which is labelled fuel on the TV car, we hook up to the primary ignition power. So let's just switch that on. The third of the dash top indicators, which is labelled min RPM on the TV car, we hook up to the secondary ignition power. And the fourth and final of the dash top indicators, we hook up to a discrete from the starter motor, just indicating that the engine is cranking. Regarding the side indicators, let's go through these. So we have left and right turn signal telltales, left and right. We have an indicator for, actually we'll do the park lights later and you'll see why in a moment. Let's look at the low beam indicator. So low beam is on, nose lights, high beam lights, rear fog lights, rear window defroster, brake input, that is from the park brake or from the hydraulic brake sensor, and an oil pressure input. Now look what happens when we put the park lights input on, and this is connected to the park lights or the headlights. This is a user option as well. When you switch the lights on, it enables you to dim all of the other side indicators. That's not clearly visible on this display because the camera tries to adjust the brightness, but take my word for it, we can, as the park lights are switched on, we can decrease the brightness of the side indicators. Fasten belts input is an output from the convenience center under the dash, the check engine input, and this battery input indicates the difference between the alternator voltage and the battery voltage, which should be 0 at all times, of course, but if the battery isn't charging, the alternator voltage could get slightly higher than the battery voltage, in which case this will happen. The battery indicator will flash with an intensity dependent upon the difference between the two voltages. So let's bring it back down again to match, and then let's take the alternator voltage right down to 0, and the further we take the alternator voltage down, the brighter the battery indicator will be. So when you first put your ignition on and the engine isn't rotating, so the alternator's generating no voltage, you will see that battery indicator illuminate, because of course the alternator voltage is 0, but the battery voltage has some definite voltage. As the alternator starts to generate a voltage, it brings up the voltage it's generating, and when it eventually matches the battery voltage, the battery indicator will go out, as it should do most of the time. Now the side indicators, at the moment they are in the normal display mode. There is an alternate display mode for the side indicators, and to demonstrate this, let's just switch off some of them. So let's switch off the high beam indicator. Let's switch off the rear fog lights. Let's switch off the brake and oil pressure inputs, so we just leave 3 of them on. Now in this normal display mode for the side indicators, the indicators are illuminated when the corresponding input is active and extinguished when the corresponding input is inactive. But to make it, to give it an option of a display which is more like the TV car, we have an alternate display mode which we can go into by a short press of push button number 2. And in this mode, when an input is inactive, the corresponding indicator is on continuously, and when an input is active, the corresponding indicator flashes at a rate of once per second. This only applies to the side indicators, and we can toggle between those two modes with a short press of push button number 2. The indicators here continue to operate in the same way. Fasten belts, check engine, and battery indicator all operate in the same way as before. Let's just go back into the normal display mode for the side indicators, and whichever mode you select, it's retained in memory, so it'll keep that same setup when you power it up again. By the way, the left and right turn signals, when they go active, we don't want them to flash, we want them to go off, so they operate in the opposite sense of the corresponding lights. When the left turn signal is on, the light will go off, and likewise with the right. Let's switch back into the normal display mode. So the ones that we will expect to stay on are the ones that are currently flashing. There we go, short press of push button number 2. Also in normal running mode, a long press of push button number 1 will toggle between the KITT and car display modes. So there we have the car display mode now, and that also will be retained when you depower the unit in memory, so it'll keep the same display mode that you select when you next power up. Let's press and release it again, and we go back into the KITT display mode. A long press of push button number 2 when we are in the normal running mode, a long press of push button number 2 will transfer us over to show mode. So we'll look at show mode in a moment. Let's toggle back into normal running mode. And of course, when you go back into normal running mode, it goes through the optional countdown sequence again before it starts to respond in the functional way. Let's talk about the different options for the function of the indicators. Right now we have all of the indicators functional, as discussed. We can cycle through the different modes by a short press of push button number 1 when we're in normal running mode. So when we're in this mode, where everything is functional, a single short press of push button number 1, confirmed by a short beep, will put us into the mode where the side indicators, where all of the indicators are non-functional. The dash top indicators and the side indicators are non-functional, and the normal auto pursuit indicators are just in a show mode, so they'll cycle through at a rate determined by the user options. If I press the push button number 1 again, a short press, the side indicators will all become show mode, and the dash top indicators will also become show mode. So that's just going to constantly go through, cycling through the countdown sequence and changing the normal auto pursuit indicators. Now, to occur at this kind of rate might get a little bit annoying, so you can change the period between, you can change the interval between the successive countdown sequences from 1 second to 255 seconds, which is about 4¼ minutes. And you can also change, with user options, the period between successive steps of the countdown. You can also change the duration and pitch of each of the tones associated with the countdown sequence, and you can change the interval between changes of the normal auto pursuit indicators. So we've looked at now the non-functional mode of the side indicators, where they're all going in a show mode. We've looked at the non-functional mode where they're in continuously on. Another press of the push button number 1, short press, will put us into a mode where only the normal auto pursuit indicators are functional. The dash top indicators and side indicators will remain on in this mode. So normal auto pursuit, these actually give a tone when normal is selected. That's an option. You can have the tone on or off, and you can change the pitch and duration of the tone associated with each of the normal auto pursuit indicators. And another press of push button number 1, short press, will put us back into the original mode where everything's functional. And when everything is functional, of course, these lower 3 indicators are not normal auto pursuit, but they are fasten belts, check engine, and battery indicator. So there we are, all indicators fully functional, single press of push button number 1, and we have non-functional, all on, except for the lower 3 which are show mode, another press, non-functional, and all the side indicators and normal auto pursuit in show mode, and another press, just the normal auto pursuit indicators are functional. Let's take a quick look at show mode. To enter show mode, we can either power up the unit with push button number 2 held in, or we can go through the menu mode. Let's go this time by holding in push button number 2 while we apply power. And after displaying the software version number, we go straight into show mode. Now show mode just continuously operates the voice display like that with no input, and also continuously goes around doing the countdown sequence and transitioning the normal auto pursuit inputs. The time between successive countdown sequences can be varied anywhere between 1 second and 255 seconds, which is about 4¼ minutes, and also the time between transitions of the normal auto pursuit indicators, that is these lower 3 indicators, can also be varied between 1 second and 255 seconds. A long press of push button number 1 when we're in show mode will toggle it between the KITT and the car voice display. So let's press it again and it'll transition back again. A long press of push button number 2 when we're in show mode will put us into normal running mode. And in normal running mode, of course, it'll do the countdown sequence if selected, and then go into the normal display mode. You can see that we have the park lights on still from before, so let's switch those off. And let's do a long press of push button number 2 again while we're in normal running mode. And that will transition us back into the show mode again. So there you go, that is show mode. Let's take a look at output test mode. Now, output test mode we can go into by powering up the unit with push button 1 held in, or we can go through the menu mode, which is having the switch active when we power up. So let's power up with the switch active, and we have the menu mode. We'll then push short presses of push button number 1 to cycle through the modes: output test, input test, normal, show, output test, and then a short press of push button number 2 to go into menu mode. To go into output test mode. And what we're going to do now is we're going to test each of the individual LEDs and make sure that it can draw bar gauges either way. And then try the behavior that we have for the voice display, one way or the other. And then the same for each of the other bar gauges. Now, push button number 1 and push button number 2, short presses when we're in this mode. Push button number 2 will speed it up slightly to a maximum of that speed. We can use the push button number 1 to slow it down if we so wish. Let's speed it up again. And when we get to the end of this mode, we'll actually slow it down so that we can have a closer look at the behavior of the side indicators. Coming to the end now, so let's slow that down. You see we now check all of the side indicators, and we check the full display, vary the brightness of it, vary the brightness of the voice display on its own, and vary the brightness of the indicators on their own. And then check the tone generator. On the dashtop indicators, and then it goes back round again. So that's output test mode. Let's look at input test mode. Again, we'll go through the menu, so let's power up with the switch number 1 active so that we see the N for normal displayed. we do a short press of push button number 1, and it shows S for show, another short press, O for output test, another short press, I for input test, and then a short press of push button number 2 to go into input test mode. Now input test mode is very similar to normal mode, except that the voice display is not showing the normal voice display. It's used to display a number of other inputs, including potentiometers, and you can see that top right bar gauge displaying the input voltage level, the audio input level. So again, let's just look at the functions in input test mode. The desktop indicators are exactly the same, indicating power is connected, indicating primary ignition power on that one, indicating secondary ignition power on that one, and indicating the starter discrete on that one. Let's just switch those off again. Notice that when we're in input test mode, the display mode for the side indicators is always the normal mode. We don't want any flashing in this mode. We want to just see that they're responding. So whatever state, whatever display mode you have selected for the side indicators, when you're in input test mode, it will always display normal display mode, that is on when the corresponding input is active. So left indicator, left input, right input, park light input, low beam input, and the park lights input doesn't change the intensity of the other LEDs in this mode. This is just input test mode to make sure that everything works. Nose lights are there, high beam lights there, rear fog lights there, rear window defroster, brake input, which is also the pursuit input when you're in normal auto pursuit mode, and the oil pressure input, which is the normal input if you have NAP function selected, check engine input, and the fasten belts input. And again, the battery voltage, the battery indicator indicates by its brightness the difference between the battery voltage and the alternator voltage. These bar gauges, as we've said, this one here indicates the input, the audio input level. This one indicates the alternator voltage. So I can move the alternator voltage up and down. You see when the alternator voltage is 0, there's a large difference between the alternator voltage and the battery voltage, so the battery indicator is on maximum brightness. As I bring the alternator voltage up until it meets the battery voltage, the battery indicator goes out, and as it goes a little bit higher, again it will come on with a low intensity. This top center bar gauge indicates the actual battery voltage. These lower two bar gauges, the left and the right one here, indicate the state of the two potentiometers that determine the brightness, although we don't vary the brightness in input test mode. But we can see that the microcontroller is seeing the input from those potentiometers. There's the other one there. And then this lower right bar gauge in input test mode just indicates the state of a number of discretes. That first LED there indicates the state of the switch, which selects on power up whether you go into menu mode or not. These next two indicate the state of the two push buttons. So there's push button number 1 and push button number 2. And that is input test mode.